One review. Book 101 is all about the books that are read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the book, The Tea Recipe Book, no other than Miss Nicole Wilson.
Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Nicole. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. So, my name is Nicole. I'm a tea writer and educator. I've been writing about tea for a little over 16 years now. So, I've been exploring tea and sharing my knowledge about it for quite some time. But in 2022, I published my first book, which is the tea recipe book. So there's a short introduction to tea, just some of the basics, but then it's a collection of recipes for everything from hot tea to lattes to bubble tea, a little bit of everything.
Miss Nicole Wilson, thank you so much for sharing your tea to the world. So, what is the primary focus of the tea recipe book?
Yes, I would say the primary focus is to really show the versatility of tea. It's a really great ingredient to use in different recipes. So I really tried to show all of the different ways that you can use tea when you're cooking.
So, what the big difference of a tea and a coffee?
I mean, there are different plants. Tea comes from specifically the Camellia sinensis plant, which is an evergreen that's native to China. Coffee comes from the coffee plant, which is a totally different species. So they're very different on that aspect.
But they are both caffeine, have this caffeine formula.
Yes, both plants do naturally contain caffeine.
So, how did you introduce to the readers to the fundamentals of tea brewing in the book?
Yeah, so in the introduction, I have just kind of like a basic introduction to all the different types of tea. There's several different categories. So people might be familiar with green tea and black tea. Those are probably the most common. But there's also white tea, oolong tea, pu'er tea. There's many different kinds. And so, there's no such thing as a right or wrong way to make tea. Is what matters is that you enjoy the taste. But I give some basic guidelines to help people be able to brew the best cup they can.
Certainly. So, what is the main chapters or sections outline in the book?
So I don't know if there's like a specific main section, but just each section has like a different focus. So there's a section on hot teas, there's a section on lattes, there's a section on iced tea, a section with like your sweets like cookies and cakes. So they're all just like each chapter has a different type of recipe that it's featuring.
So, Miss Nicole, can you name some of the hot tea recipes featured in your book?
Yeah, so I would say one of my favorites is hojicha, which is a black tea, sorry, a green tea from Japan that's very roasted. It has a really sweet, nutty taste to it, and I blend that with cinnamon to just make it like an interesting taste that you can kind of create on your own at home.
So, what types of iced tea recipes are included in the collection?
Yeah, there's quite a few. One of my favorites is to make like a good strong black tea and mix that with like a raspberry jam to add a bit of sweetness without having to add sugar directly to the tea. The jam can act as a sweetener as well.
Certainly. And how does the book approach the preparation of tea lattes?
So tea lattes, one of the things that's really important is to make sure you're brewing the tea strong enough. So you want to at least triple the amount of tea that you're using versus a regular cup of tea. As if you're adding milk, you do need the tea to be stronger so that it will be able to stand up to that strong flavor of the milk.
So, Miss Nicole, are there recipes for boba or bubble tea in the book?
There is, yeah. There's a whole chapter on bubble tea. One thing I struggled with when writing the book was, there's many different kinds of instant boba. They're not
Yes.
always the greatest quality, and they all have different preparation directions. So I developed a way to make boba at home in small batches in the microwave, which
Mhm.
really helps with being able to make tea boba tea at home by yourself, instead of having to pay a lot for like a cup of bubble tea at a shop all the time. And I that was something I was really proud of in the book.
So you did an experiment too.
Yeah, I did quite a lot of
Awesome.
recipe testing for that one.
Awesome. So does the book offer any tea-based cocktail or mocktail recipes?
Yeah, absolutely. I have both tea cocktails and mocktails. One of my favorites is like a tea sangria. So there's both a red and a white version. But tea and wine really do pair quite well together. So I really enjoy those, especially when it's very warm out. But there's also mocktails as well. One of my favorites is just mixing matcha green tea with orange juice. It's like a really good, healthy, boost of energy.
So are there any tea-infused snack or treat recipes included?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole chapter of treat recipes as well. One of my favorites is a matcha lemon sugar cookie. I just think they're delicious, and that's probably the one I make the most often.
Delicious,
Yes.
people, for sure. So how did you address the use of different tea varieties in your
Yes.
recipes?
So I do try to give some variations. Not everyone has every type of tea available at home. That can vary a lot depending on where you might be living too. But I definitely try to give some different options so that you can still make the recipe even if you don't have the exact same tea.
So, Miss Nicole, what guidance does the book provide on selecting the appropriate tea leaves for specific recipes?
So I don't give a whole lot of guidance necessarily on that, since we didn't really address specific brands. Availability for different teas can vary quite a lot. So really, the main focus of the book was accessibility. So being able to make these recipes regardless of what you have at home, using tools you might already have in your kitchen. The recipes can be made with loose leaf tea or they can be made with tea bags.
So, does the book discuss the health benefits associated with different types of tea?
Not specifically, since the topic of the book was primarily focused on cooking.
Yes.
Tea certainly is very healthy, um, but I'm also a big proponent of not really focusing so much on that. It tends to be a bit overhyped in a way. Tea isn't like a magic pill that if you take it, it will suddenly cure all your problems. I always say, tea a lot of times is promoted for weight loss. And I drink so much tea that I would just disappear if it actually worked that well for that. I still have to, eat well and exercise just like anybody else does.
Certainly. So, how are the traditional tea preparation methods
Uh,
contrasted with the modern variation in the book?
yeah. So generally, like your main way of brewing tea would be like in a teapot or a teacup, using a strainer. I always find that's a strainer is really your go-to for brewing tea. Is you always need a way to separate the leaves from the water. With tea, if it brews for too long, it will become very unpleasantly bitter. And so it's always helpful to have a strainer to make sure that you're not having that happen.
Certainly. So, what equipment or tools do you recommend for brewing and preparing the recipes?
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely does depend on the recipe. There's a lot of different variations and different options. One tool that's really helpful is a French press. You can use that for brewing tea in it. I've also have a few recipes where you use the French press to froth milk to make a latte. So that way, if you don't have a milk frother, that's an easy and simple way to do that at home too. Definitely a just a regular tea strainer is helpful. I generally don't recommend tea balls because they don't have a lot of room for the leaves to expand. And so
Hmm.
you won't get the full flavor out of your tea with them. But one that's more of like an open basket style strainer is really handy and versatile because you can use it to brew your tea in almost anything.
Easy to do, people.
Yeah.
Just get uh, Miss Nicole recommended uh, what do you call this? What do you call that? Shifter?
Oh, like a strainer, yeah.
Yes, trainer,
Mhm.
shifter. So, are there any cultural or historical insight about tea included in the book?
Yeah, there's just like a brief introduction to tea and where it comes from. Tea is native to China and is really an integral part of culture for many different Asian countries. So we include some reference to it, just especially if somebody is not that familiar with tea, they may not be aware of tea's history. But there's definitely like a lot more to dig into on that. So I would say my blog's probably a better resource for that versus the book since that's not the primary focus.
So, Miss Nicole, what will be your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Uh, yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say short term, something I really have been working on and would like to do is to offer like an introduction to tea course for people to be able to take online. Something that's like really accessible, where you can go at your own pace, but really learn the basics of tea in an approachable way. Long-term goals, I would say definitely would be to write a second book. I'm still working on figuring out what the topic for that might be, because I'd love to find a topic that hasn't already been covered in a book. But it's just figuring out what that might be that's a bit difficult.
Certainly. Tea with the benefits. Ah, if you say tea recipe book, the second one with tea with benefits. Something else. So, what would be your advice for those people out there who want to try to sip the
Yes.
tea?
So I would definitely say just try everything that you can. The wonderful thing about tea is that it's really diverse. There's so many different types out there. And so if you try something at first and you don't like it, don't necessarily say, oh, that means I don't like green tea. There's definitely lots of different types of green tea. Sometimes the quality of your tea can play a role in that. And how you brew tea also makes a big difference. So definitely figuring out a way to control the temperature of your water helps a lot because it
Mhm.
gives you control over your tea experience. Green tea, for example, gets really bitter if the water's too hot. So I often hear from people who tell me they hate green tea, but it's often because they are making with water that's too hot
Too
for
hot.
their personal taste. So I definitely think just being adventurous and not being afraid to try new things is really helpful.
Try people to sip one cup of tea. It's so relaxing,
Definitely.
especially green tea. Okay, so good luck for for your goals, and thank you for your advice. So, how accessible are the recipes for beginners new to the tea preparation?
Yeah, so they're very accessible. I really tried. My publisher was very specific in that they wanted a book that had recipes anybody can make. So it's usually using tools that you already have in your home. You don't really need to go out and buy new things. We might just use pots and pans that you already have at home. You can brew your tea in a measuring cup. You really don't need a lot of fancy equipment.
So, does the book provide any tips for sourcing quality tea leaves or ingredients?
Not necessarily. We talked about before that, because we wanted the book to be accessible, it's really designed to be able to use whatever type of tea you might be able to get. So I'll give like a general idea of, this recipe may be best with this particular type of tea, but you can use really any tea that you might already have to make most of the recipes.
So, Miss Nicole, can you share to us your best recipe that you would like to share to our listeners on Book 101?
Ah, best recipe. That's tough. I really love them all. It's like being a favorite child. I worked
Yes.
so hard on all of them. I would say, let me see. It was like honestly the bubble tea one. I think is definitely one of them, just because it really took a lot of work to figure that out. And I I've had so many people tell me that they, were grateful for having a way to make bubble tea like that at home without really having to go too crazy on equipment or investing in different things.
So, can you? tell us the simple way how to make bubble tea.
Yeah, so I mean, it's sorry. I mean, the recipe's in the book, so go ahead and check out the book to get the recipe. But the good thing about bubble tea that is that boba is actually quite simple. It's primarily made out of tapioca flour, so that's really the main ingredient that you would need to be able to do that at home. So that's something that you I was able to just find in my regular grocery store. So definitely very easy to do and find the ingredients.
So, are there a suggestion for pairing teas with specific foods or occasions?
Yeah, absolutely. Tea is similar to wine, where you can pair it with a lot of different things. And there's different approaches that you can take to that. Sometimes pairing like with like is good. So if a tea is very sweet, pairing it with something that's sweet or has a similar flavor note, like if there's a citrus taste, that would pair well. Sometimes you might want to have a contrast. So if you have a tea that's very strong, pairing that with something like a really creamy cheese can help bring out different aspects of both ingredients. So it really just kind of depends on what kind of experience you want to create.
So, Miss Nicole, how did you incorporate personal experiences or anecdotes into the recipes?
Yeah, so in above each recipe is kind of like a little introduction. I tried to find really interesting different facts or information that applied to each recipe just to give a little bit of interest. Um, I'm somebody, my interest in tea really has a lot of crossover into different exploring different cultures or digging into history. So I tried to include little tidbits like that throughout the book.
Good job, Miss Nicole. Good job. So before we wrap up our discussion today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, in its fifth season, people. Fifth season with my partner, Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef or specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We're reading our letter senders all over the world. So, Miss Nicole, what feedback or reviews has the tea recipe book received from readers and tea enthusiasts?
Yeah, so I've definitely heard from a lot of people that they really enjoyed how approachable the book is. That is even if you're not necessarily a tea expert, it's not too intimidating to feel like you can, go ahead and give the recipes a try, which is really great to hear.
Certainly. Miss Nicole Wilson, thank you so much for sharing your tea book to the world. We are hoping that there is a follow up for this tea, more tea books to come,
Definitely.
and we hope that this year or next year you are most welcome to come back on Book 101 review. So can you please invite our listeners to support your the tea recipe book?
Absolutely. So the book can be found on Amazon. You can also find it through most major booksellers, or you can ask your local bookstore to order it for you. Most stores are able to do that. You can find me at tformeplease.com and at tformeplease on most social media platforms.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Nicole Wilson because if you support her, as I said, more tea book to come. So, Miss Nicole, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Monica people, see you soon.